Have you ever gone through the Bible and when they talk about the tribes of Israel, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, have you ever wondered where the tribe of Joseph disappeared to? After all, Joseph was one of the 12. He was the favorite of dad, and yet there's no tribe of Joseph. There's a tribe of Dan, a tribe of Naphtali, Issachar, all these other ones that we never hear anything else about. But Joseph, the main character in the story, doesn't get a tribe named after him. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We've got 2 chapters to go, or 3 chapters to go, and 2 episodes to go in this hopefully helpful and certainly long series on Genesis. We've given Genesis, some of the time that it's deserved. But today we're going to discover why there's no tribe of Joseph, but in fact Joseph gets a double tribe in the names of his 2 sons rather than in his own name. So that's what we'll be talking about today. The idea of Joseph and getting 2 tribes from 1 son in Genesis 48. This will be a slightly shorter, on the short end of these episodes, because next week's will be a little longer than usual because the last 2 chapters deserve to be treated as one, and there's a bunch of stuff in that to conclude out the study today. So let's take a look at it as we walk through it. Genesis chapter 48, beginning with verse 1. Sometime later, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," Israel rallied his strength and sat up in the bed. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty spared me at Luz in the hand of Canaan, and there he blessed me, and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." There's the key to it. "Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit will be reckoned under the names of their brothers." All right, so we've seen this before with Abraham and Isaac, the father's blessing. And in fact, we've seen a blessing that's played a big part in the entire book of Genesis, from God blessing each of the days by saying it was good to Abraham blessing and so on. And this is what's happening here. Jacob knows that he's going to be passing away soon, and he has an idea. In order to give Jacob a double blessing compared to his brothers, he's thought, hey, he's got 2 sons already. Let's give each of them a tribe, and then the other sons will come under the 2 tribes of their brothers. And I don't know how they sorted that out later in history. I don't know if anybody ever does. But this is a big deal. The father's blessing and the idea that Joseph now is going to get the double blessing is huge for him. Ephraim and Manasseh, being considered as sons of Jacob, not as grandsons of Jacob, gave Joseph's family line the double portion blessing. And it also caused them to become 2 of the 12 tribes of Israel, even though sometimes they're referred to as half tribes. In Joshua, a couple times that's referenced. This now fulfills or allows for the fulfillment of the implied promise that he got when he received the robe that began this whole mess. Remember way back when they were younger and he was the kid who stayed at home while the other sons went out into the field, he got this multicolored robe or coat of many colors from dad, which designated him as the primary heir of the family. He was going to receive what the older son should have received. And to do that, you get the double blessing. That, as I said back then, if you've got 12 sons, you divide everything that you have into 13 pieces, and the oldest son typically would get 2 of those pieces and everybody else would get 1. That's what the double blessing meant. And with the double blessing, it also shows that you are the one who's going to lead the family. So Joseph, being the second youngest, but the favorite of dad, gets this. And now dad is going to make sure that this actually takes place with the land that they will inherit, which is where their wealth will come from. So this is a reaffirmation of what happened way back with the coat of many colors. Okay, we'll continue on now. Verse 7. Jacob still speaking. "As I was returning from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan, while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there beside the road to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem." A lot of Bethlehem in the Bible, huh? Yeah, we know what it's most important for, but now we're beginning to discover why, aren't we? When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, "Who are these?" "They are the sons God has given me here," Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." So he's just said, "I'm going to bless your sons." And then he looks at the sons and goes, "Who are these 2?" what do we got here? He's older. He's about to die. This is short-term memory loss. That's probably all it is. But he continues on for verse 10. Now Israel's eyes were failing because of his old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again. And now God has allowed me to see your children too. What a blessing that is, right? Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. So why are they mentioning here which was on which side and which hand, and they're not on the knee anymore, but they're standing in front of him and all that? Why does this matter? And here's why. The right hand was always for the dominant blessing. So Joseph put the oldest son at the dominant hand, which is interesting because he, as the second youngest son, actually got the main blessing. So you think he'd have a hint that dad may not go along according to the usual pattern here, just like he didn't with me. But he does so because it makes sense. The oldest one gets the right hand blessing. Dad's eyesight is failing. He may not be sure who is in front of him. So I'm going to help him. I'm going to put the oldest at his right hand. This isn't preferential. This is not him preferring one son over another. He's expecting this to go according to the normal custom, and he's helping his older father out who doesn't see well. So that's all that seems to be going on. But that's not what happens, as it never does in this story. So let's take a look at what does occur, continuing now in verse 14. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger. And crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. So this is not kind of a mistake. Crossing your arms is a really intentional move here. He knows exactly what he's doing. Verse 15. Then he blessed Joseph and said, May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walk faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of their fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth. When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. He blessed them that day and said, In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. So much going on in this passage. It's interesting, right? First of all, as we said, Joseph lines them up according to custom. Jacob crosses his arms to intentionally break that custom. Joseph's upset. How dare you bless the younger one? When that's exactly what happened to him. He's now beginning to get a taste of what it might have been like to be one of his brothers and go, wait a minute, that's not how this is supposed to go. But his father says, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. The younger son is going to be okay. I mean, the older son is going to be okay, but the younger son, I'm going to give him the primary blessing. And then what he does is he reconfirms the covenant that goes all the way back to Abraham. Now, a couple interesting things happens in here. One that I'd like to take a look at. There's a reference in verse 16 to the angel who has delivered me from all harm. Now, what does that mean? This is one of the places where we get the idea of a guardian angel, which has some biblical precedent, but this is not a good place to get it from. Here's part of the challenge in understanding this phrase, the angel who has delivered me from all harm. The question being, who is this angel? If you only read it according to verse numbers, you get the wrong impression about what's happening here. Okay, most of the time, the chapter numbers and the verse numbers in the Bible were not there originally when the Bible was written. They were added just a few hundred years ago, and they're very helpful to have so that we can all go to the same verse at the same time, because they're not going to be on the same page. And now with apps, they're not on pages at all, right? So this gives us a way of being on the same spot. But at times, the way they put the numbers isn't great, and this is one of those spots. If you only look at verse 16, it starts like this. The angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. So it sounds like he's talking about like a guardian angel. The problem is that's the end of a sentence that began in verse 15. So let's not read it according to verse, because the verses were added later. Let's read the sentence, because that's the full thought. And here's the sentence, which begins in verse 15. Then he, Jacob, blessed Joseph and said, may the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from harm, may he bless these boys. Do you hear the difference there? He's referring to God, to the God of, and then he refers to God in three different ways. Which God are we referring to? The God of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, the God who has been my shepherd, the God who is the angel who has protected me or delivered me from all harm. He refers to God in three different ways: as the God of his fathers, as the God his shepherd, and as the God who is his angel. So the angel here is simply the word messenger or protector. It doesn't mean an angel like separate from God. It's a way of referring to God himself. So the angel in 14:16 is a reference to God as his guardian, as his messenger, and as his protector. But this is why it's important to read the Bible in larger context. If you just pick that verse out, you get the wrong idea. It's not going to change your theology in any significant way, so it's not a big deal. But I think it's an important illustration of how we need to be careful when we're reading the Bible and why the bigger picture really informs what these smaller pieces mean. Okay, so again, he crossed his arms, which probably Joseph assumed was a mistake because he was older, and he goes, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. So even his short-term memory loss and his loss of eyesight has not affected his determination. It has not affected his decision-making skills. And so he knows what he's doing with his blessing. So since blessings come up a lot in Genesis, we've referred to them before, let's talk about them for a bit before we leave this. First of all, Bible blessings acted on two levels. First of all, the blessing recognized what was going to happen. So some blessings were predictive and passive. That is, I'm an observer and I'm telling you what I see. Sometimes it helped steer them towards a desired future. That is, I'm blessing you in a creative way, in a way of making something happen in a very proactive or active way. So sometimes the blessings were like, we've seen it already. I can't help you. This is just what's going to happen. And other times it's, I'm going to declare this so that it happens. And this is a bit of a mix of both of those. Now, if you're wondering where the Bible tells us that that's how blessings work, it's not a written rule. It's simply what we observe by looking at all the blessings in the Bible. And we see some blessings are just simply, sorry, this is just the way it's going to be. Some blessings are, I'm going to declare this so that it is that. And some blessings are a mix of those two. This is similar to prophecies, which we'll see in the final episode next week. A lot of prophecies are predictive, that this is just the way it's going to be. I'm just telling you what's coming. And some prophecies are, if you do this, then this will happen. And so they're more proactive and more creative in the way that they do these things. Okay. Genesis 3, for instance, when we looked at that, was an example of that. When it says the male will rule over the female, in the context of that, it is very obvious that God is lamenting that this will be the case. God isn't saying, because you sinned now, I'm going to make sure men rule over women. He's saying, this is what you're stuck with now. It's a prophecy, but it's not a prophecy that makes something happen. It's a prophecy that declares what will happen. It's more passive and observing than it is active and creating in that process. Okay, but in that section, also in chapter 3, verse 16, there is an active and creative prophecy in chapter 3:16 where it talks about Satan's eventual defeat with his head being crushed by Jesus on the cross. So both, sometimes passive, sometimes active. This one is a combination of the two. Okay, now we move along, chapter 48, verse 21. Then Israel said to Joseph, and sometimes I say Jacob, sometimes it says Israel. I don't know why his name just flips back and forth, but it's the same guy. Israel, Jacob, same person. Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you I give one more ridge of land than to your brothers, the ridge I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. Now here's an interesting little side note that almost never gets relayed, and one of the reasons why it's so important to read through every verse of the Bible, because there's hidden gems in here that we sometimes don't take a look at. He's already giving Joseph double the tribes, and now a very small but very specific piece of land. He says, I'm making sure you get this piece of land. Now, why is that? Here's why. I want you to remember who the original readers or the original hearers, because this would have been read to them, of this document would have been. Moses, who wrote Genesis, wrote about Israel, Jacob, giving a strategic rib to Joseph's two tribes so that the others wouldn't fight among themselves for it. Now, he talks about there is this place, this ridge that I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. This battle is not recorded anywhere in Scripture, so we don't know anything about it other than what is in this particular passage. But from the context here and from what we know of their history and from the geography, we know where it is. This was a strategic high point ridge. Ridge means, right? It's not a valley, it's a ridge, which means up high. So it was a strategic ridge that probably belonged to Israel, had been stolen by the Amorites, and that Israel or Jacob won back again by having a battle. This was obviously an important ridge. Why would you fight over it? Well, it's kind of like, well, in American history, for instance, Iwo Jima, right? Not just simply because of the photo and the statue that we have of the raising the flag on Iwo Jima, but Iwo Jima, a tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific, was strategic. It was where you had to stop to refuel. And if you owned it, you could control that part of the ocean by this little tiny island. This ridge was that kind of a thing. If you own this ridge, you can see for a distance in all directions and you control that entire territory. So he's saying, I want Manasseh and Ephraim to control that strategic ridge and not any of their other brothers. So he makes it clear here. And again, who's reading it? Who's reading it is the tribes at the end of 400 years of slavery. They're about to go back in and reclaim the land. They're going to have to fight for every piece of it. So what he's saying is, no matter who wins it, because different tribes are going to win different battles, no matter who wins it, that ridge, when it is won back again, will go to Ephraim and Manasseh's tribes and not to any of the other tribes. So by writing it here in Genesis, Moses and God himself, of course, assures that there will be less fighting among the tribes about who owns that strategic piece of land. It's something very, very determined by God himself. Okay, that's where this chapter ends. Like I told you, it'll be a little bit short. But let me also give you an idea of what's coming up next. So if you are watching these as they happen, that is, this is March of 2021, then coming up soon, we're going to have our next study. If you're watching this months or years later, then this other study is probably already part way out or all the way out. But here's what's coming for those of you who are watching it live as we go along. March 25th to May 27th of this year, we're going to do our next study, and it's going to be on How to Read the Bible. It's going to be 10 parts, and let me walk you through what the 10 parts will be. Part one, we're going to talk about the Bible, that it's exploring a library and not just reading a book. This changes the way we look at the Bible when we understand it as a library, which it is, and not as a single book. Then we'll look at the differences between the Testaments. We read the Old Testament differently than the New, different contexts, different meanings. 3, why it's important to start with a book of the Bible and not a verse. We saw a little bit of that already in this one. Then we'll take a look at the Old Testament history books from Genesis through Nehemiah. You read history different than you read poetry. So how do you read the history books? Then 5, how do you read the wisdom and poetry books, Esther to Solomon? 6, how do you read the prophets, Isaiah through Malachi? Next, how do you read the gospel in the book of Acts, which are the history books of the New Testament? Then how do you read the letters? You read letters different from prophecies, different from poetry, different from history. Right? Think about it. When you get a letter, whether it's email or physical letter, you don't read it the same way you read a novel. And most of the ways we read it differently are subconscious, so we don't even notice it. But when you go to the Bible, you have to pay attention to that so that you're not misinterpreting what it's trying to say. And then the final book of the Bible, Revelation, we'll take a look at the last prophecy, because that book is read completely different from the other 65 books, because it's written completely differently than the other 65 books, with the exception of a couple spots in the Old Testament, in little bits of Daniel and Ezekiel, for instance. And then the final week of it will be, we're actually going to walk you through how to find and use some free Bible study tools online. Right now, there's more free material for Bible study online than I could get by spending thousands of dollars when I was younger. Literally, when I was younger in seminary, they told us, if you're going to have a proper Bible library to do all the Bible study you need to do, start saving now, because you're going to have to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on books. And I'm talking 40 years ago. That was like spending 50 grand today. Okay. It was a lot of money that we expected to spend on books. Almost all of that information is available for free online today. So we're going to give you a chance of where to find that and how to use it so you can do it in your way. So anyway, that's it. Next week will be our last one. We're going to take a look at how the story of Genesis concludes, including some blessings and some prophecies, mostly about each of the tribes, and then to the death of Joseph, and how it sets up what the book of Exodus will look like. All right, so see you next week.